What's up, YouTube peeps and barbecue freaks? Thank you guys for joining me today. Today's video, we're going to, I've got to come this weekend, so we're going to take a brisket, we're going to trim it up. I'm going to show you how I do it. Now, keep in mind, this is not like a CBS trim. This is, here in Texas, we don't do burn ends, although they just started to allow them. Still, a lot of cooks aren't doing them. I'm not doing them. So I'm going to show you how I trim a brisket. I'm going to show you some of the knives that I use. I'll talk about some of the things that I look for when picking out a brisket. We'll get it out of the package, get it trimmed up. We'll show you what that looks like, and that video's coming up next. All right, so some of the things you're gonna need are some of the things that I use when trimming my brisket. Here I have a 12-inch Dow Strong slicer knife. This works perfect for getting long strokes, long even strokes. What that's gonna do is help me when I'm removing the fat and the silver skin from the meat side, help me get even slices so that way the top of my brisket isn't choppy. I will take another knife, just kind of trim the sides, and I can use this one also, but this chopping knife here from Dow Strong is sometimes a little better. Plus it's really, really sharp. So that's why I like using it. And you're also gonna need a good pair of shears. We're gonna use these to round off the brisket. Here I have a prime brisket. This is right under, I don't know if you can see that, but right under 17 pounds. So that's what the brisket looks like. A couple things that I look for when picking out a brisket. One is how thick is the flat. Since my slices are gonna come from right here in the middle, I want a brisket that has a really thick flat. The other thing I look for is this decal fat right in here. How far does this come down? If it comes all the way down, I'm probably not gonna use it because that's a good indication that there's probably gonna be a good line of fat that runs all the way down to the bottom of the brisket, which is gonna interfere with my slices. So this one comes about halfway. I think it's gonna be fine. So I want one where this decal fat doesn't come more than halfway. If it comes more than halfway, I don't want it. Two, I'm looking for the overall shape. Sometimes you have the point that is like really, really thin, and as it comes down into the flat area, it fans out. I don't really like that, even though I do cut the point off. I like to start with one that is fairly symmetrical, you know, from the very beginning. I just think I'm gonna get a better product at the end. And the last thing I look for is this fat cap. I wanna make sure that it has a full entire fat cap. Sometimes a butcher can get carried away, trim into this fat cap and expose some of that meat underneath the fat cap. If I see that, I don't want it. I wanna be able to control how much fat I take off from the bottom. So I always take a look at this fat cap. This one looks nice. I always take a look at this fat cap and see how thick that is. So we're gonna get this out and then we'll get it trimmed up, and I'll show you how I do that. All right, so first thing I do when I get the brisket out of the crab vac, I wipe it down with some paper towels, get any blood that might be on there off. And the very first cut I make is right here in this decal fat. This is not gonna render out. I already know that. It isn't gonna be any good for me. So I'm gonna take my knife and slice that right off. This is just all fat. It's really hard. Let me show you this. You see it's all fat. That is not, as hard as it is not going to render at all. So that's usually the first cut I make. And then I just kind of look at that brisket and see. So I know the point sits a lot higher than the flat. It kind of sits like this. And the way we level that out is we'll take off some fat from the bottom side. However, since I know this whole point section right here is going to come off, I do want to trim this up. You'll see, hope you can make it out. Like, you'll see a lot of discoloration here. That comes from the plant when they steam these briskets. That's just that hot water steam there. But while it's attached to the brisket, I like to go ahead and clean it up because while I remove it, I will save it. And I use a lot of this brisket, or this whole brisket point, for carne guisada. Whenever I'm doing a carne guisada competition, this is perfect for that. By the way, I am wearing under this plastic glove a cut-proof glove, which I highly, highly recommend. And what I'm doing here is on this back side, I'm just removing a lot of this fat. I can do it now while it's attached to the brisket, or I can do it once I cut the point off. It's just easier to do it this way. So just gonna kind of clean that up, and then I'm gonna remove all of the fat that's on the top and the silver skin that's on the top. And what I like to do is I'll turn this around. The grains run this way on this brisket. So when I slice it, I want to go with the grain. And since I'm right-handed, I take my left hand, I put it right under the brisket, kind of lift it up. And this is where this 12-inch slicer knife comes into play, and is really helpful. Sometimes you'll see someone trim a brisket and the top is really choppy. That's because they're using a smaller knife, trying to get that silver skin, trying to get that fat off. But when you use a slicer knife, a 12-inch slicer knife, you're able to go in here and just get one smooth stroke like that, and keep that top of that brisket even. And I'll just go through this entire top, removing all of this fat and silver skin. Now I'm trying not to, when I get my knife in here, saw back and forth. I'm just trying to get a nice, clean, even stroke. Come down to the bottom, get this. I just want to remove all that fat, all that silver skin. I do not want that on my brisket as it's cooking. Again, just take nice even strokes all the way down and remove all that fat. And just lift with your other hand underneath the brisket. Lift it up so it's easier to get to that fat and to that silver skin. So I'm gonna get this top cleaned up, and I'll pick back up in just a second. All right, so I got most of it removed. There's this fat seam right in here. I'm not gonna chase it just yet. I'm not sure how far it's gonna go down. I will say so far I'm not liking that. But as we continue to trim it, we'll go ahead and address it a little bit later. So I don't know if you can make this out, but the bottom of the brisket, this side sits lower than this side, so it's kind of offset, and I want it to be even. So what I'm going to do is, since this is a higher part, actually before I do that, I'm going to come down on the right side and the left side, and I'm just going to make a cut straight down. Even that out. I'm gonna do the same thing to this side right here. We want to move a lot of this fat. There's I'm not sure what this is called, but it's like a vein right in here that if they bite into that, if the judges bite into that, it's gonna be really, really chewy. So I'm gonna come just inside of that and work my way all the way down. And usually on this side, if I have a sharper knife, a little more sturdier knife, which is what I like this one for, is what I'll use this knife for, right in here. Usually just this one cut. So now we have the left side is straight, the right side is straight. but again, this bottom is still offset. So I want to bring this bottom part up to the lowest end here. And the way I'm going to do that is just take my knife right across. Just make a cut right across and make a straight line. Now, this meat here, I'm not going to get any slices out of it. It isn't going to do me any good. Now, if you want to save it and use it for something, you definitely can. And I actually might save some of this. I can add it to my carne guisada. I just like to remove the fat from it ahead of time so I don't have to worry about doing it later. This small piece here is going to burn off. I'm simply taking off this fat cap from the bottom because I know I'm not gonna need that at any point. But I'm actually probably gonna just put this aside and I'll worry about this a little bit later. What the heck? Let's go ahead and cut it now. And I do have a carne guisada competition coming up, so I'm definitely going to save this meat for that. So take that, put aside. So now this left side is straight, this right side is straight, and this bottom is straight. Now I want to round these bottom corners off, and I'm simply going to come here, take my knife, round it right off, just going straight down. I'll flip it over the other way so you can get a better look at it. So this is what the bottom is going to look like. You see it's rounded off. Now, we are going to take our shears later and round off the top of the brisket and the bottom of it. But for now, that's good. Now, before I take off any more from the flat, I want to start working on the point. Again, this point sits a whole lot higher than the flat, and I want it to sit even. But instead of trying to continue to take off more from the top part of the point right now, what we're going to do is we're actually going to flip this over. Actually, here's some fat here I want to remove. We're going to take this, flip it over. That's where your mohawk is at. That's why this brisket is sitting a whole lot higher on the point, because it's mohawk. And I'm going to take my knife and just start trimming some of that fat. I'm going to completely remove this mohawk. Now, I am going to expose some of this point meat, which I'm quite all right with because there's a lot of fat in this point meat that I'm not worried about it drying out. Not on this grade of a brisket anyway. Plus there's some of this that right here that's exposed that I'm actually going to remove a little bit later. So if I flip it over, I can see it sits a little bit lower, but it's still kind of high. So I'm going to flip it back and continue to work a little bit more on this bottom side. I'm going to take off some of that fat. And if you notice, I'm not sawing again. I'm just trying to get nice even strokes. As I clean it up. have this fat seam here between the flat and the point. I'm gonna turn this at an angle and remove some of this fat. Again, I'm just trying to bring this bottom side down a little more. So when I flip it over, it isn't so high. Okay, so that sits a whole lot lower. Still higher than I want. But again, we're gonna cut all of this off. So here's that decal fat. I'm actually gonna take this knife, remove some of this decal fat, the rest of it. And as you cut it, you should be able to pull right up on it. And get rid of that. Kind of clean it up a little bit. So for competition, all I'm going to use is from down here to about right here, right in here. So all of this decal fat is and point is going to come off. So I'll flip it over. I still will probably have to take off a little bit more on the bottom side, but for now, I want to see how this looks. Come up, and I'm just making a light line. If I like the shape of this, then I'll go deeper and cut the rest of it. So I'm liking the shape of that. Now I'm just taking my knife and going straight down, cutting right through the brisket. And just trying to release it, release the point from the rest of this brisket. Come down a little here. And I just keep cutting until it's completely off. All right, so I'm almost got this point removed. Again, I'm taking my knife and it's just straight up and down. There you go. Now I have this whole point removed. Again, we are not getting rid of this. We are going to save it. I'm going to trim it up a little bit. Some of that I'm not going to use as I cook will kind of burn off. That I'm not going to use. But this chunk here, we are definitely going to use. So I'll just trim a little bit, but I'll trim the rest of it later. But man, look at that marbling in there. This is why I use this meat for my carne guisada. That marbling in there is freaking amazing. Look at that. When that melts, as when you're cooking the carne guisada, that's some good stuff. So anyway, I'm gonna set this aside. And this is what we have left. This is gonna be our comp brisket. As you can see, I cut it a whole lot smaller than from what I started with. I like to start with a larger brisket so I can cut it down to the size I want. If I start with a smaller brisket, I'm kind of limited on what I can do with it. But most of it does not go to waste, so I don't mind trimming it down so small. So this here, I'm just gonna come straight down and just start cleaning it up. Now the point still does sit a little higher than the flat. There's some more of this duckle fat here that I want to remove. But most of it is going to come off from the bottom. You can see how fat that fat cap is still. So we want to bring that down some. Bring that down a little bit. Some more here we want to bring down. I'm just coming around the outside of the brisket, trimming it up, making it even. Fat here I want to get off. Take a little more of this meat off, which I'm okay with. Again, I'm trying to bring this brisket down a little bit so the entire thing sits evenly. Of that. And just kind of rounding it off, make sure the whole sides are kind of straight up and down. And then I can start finishing up the top part here. I'm fairly happy with this. I will continue to just touch it up a little bit. Again, I'm not happy with this fat seam right here. We'll see if I can trim some more of it off. What's going to happen is if I leave that on there as it cooks and I go and get my slices, that's going to start to break off. But that's about it for now. This is where I'm going to take my shears. I'll do the bottom side first and just kind of round off the edges. 90-degree angles and heat do not go well together, so I want to make sure that I round the edges off from the top and the bottom. And I'm going to flip it over and do the same thing to the other side. The meat side is a little more important that you do this on. Fat side, not as much, but you definitely want to do it. So we got that. We're gonna flip it over. I'll clean up the top here a little bit more in a bit, but come all the way down and just round these edges off. If you don't round them off, like I said, what'll happen is when I go and after it's cooked and start slicing my brisket, the edge here will start flaking off. And I don't want that. Not when they're judging on appearance. So this brisket, this brisket started out at just under 17 pounds. And man, I wish I could weigh it, but if I weighed it now, I bet you it's sitting right at about maybe 8 pounds. So as you can see, I'm really aggressive with my brisket trim. I'm not trying to feed a whole lot of people, so I don't need a big brisket. I need enough to get my 6 slices or 9 slices, and that's it. And you know, trimming it down trimming it down to smaller is also going to help it cook quicker. So that's pretty much it. The last thing I will do is I take my slicing knife and I'll just kind of scrape the top. So, and focus a little bit more on the sections that are sitting a little bit higher. You can see that meat is coming off, but I'm not cutting into the brisket. I'm just kind of shaving it. This one, just kind of shave it. Make sure it's even. I might take off a little bit more on this decal fat here. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm not gonna get any slices out of that, so I could probably leave it alone. My slices are gonna come from right in here. Probably from here to here is where I'm gonna get my slices this weekend. So that part I can probably just leave alone. All right, so the brisket is done, it's trimmed up. This is what it looks like. So I'm very happy with it. Again, my slices are gonna come from about right in here. So I'm not overly concerned about this bottom part or too much about this top part. Normally I would take off a little more of this decal fat, but with this one, I think I'm gonna go ahead and leave it because my slices are gonna come from right in here. So hopefully this fat seam, some of it came off a little bit more, but hopefully that's not gonna be an issue. I think it'll be fine. So that's what it looks like. Here, finished product. All right, guys, so that's my brisket trim. Again, that's simply the way that I do it. It's the way I've always done it. It's worked for me. If you do yours different, that's fine. Again, keep in mind, this is not for like a CBS. This is strictly for here in Texas. You know, we don't do burn-ins or anything like that. Although CBA has started allowing burn-ins, but I don't do burn-ins. So, you know, I trimmed this up to my liking, to the way that I need it for competition. So if you have any questions, leave them below and I will make sure to get back to you. I appreciate you guys stopping, hanging out, watching this video. We will see you on the next one. Take care.